The vastness of space was silent, but the tension that filled it was deafening. Earth, having been isolated from the rest of the galaxy for centuries, had finally made contact with an alien race. Only it was not the peaceful encounter humanity had once dreamed of. The Ulan fleet, a massive armada representing one of the galaxy's most advanced and aggressive civilizations, arrived at the edge of the solar system with an ultimatum that shook the very core of human civilization. The message was simple and brutal: surrender completely and unconditionally within 24 hours, or Earth would be reduced to a barren wasteland, its inhabitants nothing more than ash scattered across the stars. For the Ulan, this was a standard procedure, a means of expanding their empire by subjugating what they deemed to be lesser species. But for humanity, it was an existential threat unlike any other, a challenge that would force them to the brink of extinction or propel them into the annals of galactic history as the species that refused to bow. The Ulan had arrived with a fleet so vast that it blotted out the stars, a force so overwhelming that even Earth's most advanced military minds struggled to comprehend its full scope. This was the first time humanity had encountered intelligent life beyond their own planet, and the reality of the situation was far from the hopeful contact with benevolent beings that had fueled science fiction for centuries. Instead, humanity was confronted with the cold, hard truth that they were not alone in the universe, and that those who shared the cosmos with them were not necessarily friendly. In the top-secret SETI facility, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Earth's leaders gathered in a hastily convened emergency session. The room was filled with the hum of machinery and the frantic murmur of military and scientific personnel, all working tirelessly to find a solution to the impending crisis. Among them was Joseph Holmes, a former soldier who had become Earth's foremost xenolinguist, his expertise in deciphering alien languages now the last hope for negotiating with the Ulan. Holmes arrived at the command center with a sense of urgency that mirrored the desperation in the eyes of those around him. The Ulan's ultimatum played on a massive screen, their alien commander, Pryor, delivering the message with an air of condescension that made Holmes's blood boil. "Your species is primitive," Pryor declared, his voice cold and mechanical through the translation software. "Inferior. For the glory of the Ulan Empire, you will kneel or you will burn." The room was silent as the transmission ended, the weight of Pryor's words hanging heavily in the air. General Riggs, a grizzled veteran who had seen his fair share of conflicts, turned to Holmes with a look of grim determination. "You're our best shot at opening a dialogue with these bastards," he said, his voice low and filled with the kind of authority that came from years of command. "Buy us time to mobilize." Holmes nodded, feeling the weight of the world settle on his shoulders. He had always known that his work might one day be crucial to humanity's survival, but he had never imagined it would come to this. As Earth's military forces scrambled to take up defensive positions, Holmes and his team of linguists and scientists worked around the clock, leveraging the most advanced translation technology at their disposal to establish a rudimentary line of communication with the Ulan. The task was daunting. The Ulan language was complex, filled with nuances that were difficult to grasp, even with the aid of cutting-edge algorithms. But Holmes was nothing if not determined. He pored over every scrap of data they had on Ulan biology and society, searching for any hint of a weakness that could be exploited, any cultural nuance that might give humanity an edge in the negotiations. Time was running out, and the Ulan showed no signs of patience. Every attempt at communication was met with the same dismissive response: humans were insects, unworthy of anything but subjugation. Holmes knew that if they were going to survive, they would have to show the Ulan something they had never encountered before, a species that, despite its relative youth, had clawed its way from the caves to the stars through sheer tenacity, adaptability, and an indomitable will to survive. The clock ticked down, each second bringing humanity closer to the moment of reckoning. Earth's defenses were formidable by human standards: nuclear missiles, railguns, advanced fighter jets. But against the Ulan's technology, they were little more than toys. Capitulation. seemed the only logical option, but Holmes knew that it was not in humanity's nature to surrender without a fight. The Ulan had badly underestimated them, and that mistake would cost them dearly. Holmes worked tirelessly, crafting a message that he hoped would resonate with the Ulan, one that would make them see humanity not as mere primitives, but as potential allies with something valuable to offer. He spoke of humanity's triumphs, of their technological advancements, and most importantly, of their unyielding spirit. But words alone would not be enough to sway the Ulan. They respected strength above all else, and Holmes knew they would need proof of humanity's capabilities. In a bold move, Holmes decided to attach schematics for a revolutionary propulsion system that had been in development for years, one that could potentially outpace even the most advanced Ulan ships. It was a gamble, revealing such a critical piece of technology to an enemy, but Holmes knew it was a risk worth taking. With a deep breath, he hit the broadcast button, sending humanity's plea across the void of space to the waiting Ulan fleet. On the bridge of the Ulan flagship, Pryor's eyes narrowed as the message played across the view screen. The human's words were eloquent, his tone respectful yet firm, but Pryor was not easily impressed. His finger hovered over the termination key, ready to dismiss the transmission as more meaningless bluster. But before he could end it, his science officer spoke up, her voice tinged with surprise. "Commander, you need to see this," she said, bringing up the propulsion schematics that Holmes had attached. The bridge fell silent as the Ulan officers studied the designs, their minds racing as they realized the implications. The efficiency of the propulsion system was remarkable, far beyond what they had expected from a species as young as humanity. "If these calculations are correct," the science officer continued, her tone now filled with a hint of awe, "this engine could outperform our best ships." Pryor leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. If the humans could offer technology like this, perhaps they were more than just another race to be subjugated. Perhaps there was something to gain here beyond conquest. "Hail them back," Pryor ordered, his curiosity piqued. "Let's see what else this Joseph Holmes has to say." The view screen flickered and Holmes's face appeared once more, his expression guarded but hopeful. "Commander Pryor," he began, inclining his head in a gesture of respect. "Thank you for receiving my message." Pryor studied the human carefully, weighing his options. "Your words are pretty human," Pryor replied, his tone gruff. "But words are cheap. You offer technology, but how do I know it's not a trick?" Holmes met the alien's gaze unflinchingly, his voice steady as he responded. "I'm proposing an exchange, a meeting, face-to-face, to discuss the potential for a mutually beneficial partnership between our peoples." Pryor's eyes narrowed further, suspicion warring with curiosity in his mind. The human was bold, he had to admit, and if the propulsion technology was genuine, there could be much to gain from such an alliance. "Very well," the commander said at last, his voice laced with reluctance. "You will come aboard my ship alone and unarmed. We will see if your partnership has any merit." The transmission ended, and Holmes let out a shaky breath, the tension draining from his body. It was a start, a fragile thread of hope in the face of annihilation, but he knew the real challenge was just beginning. As he prepared to board the shuttle that would carry him to the Ulan flagship, Holmes steeled himself for the confrontation to come. The fate of humanity rested on his shoulders, and he would not let them down. One way or another, he would make the Ulan see the value in coexistence. He had to. The shuttle docked with a shudder, and the airlock hissed open, revealing the cavernous hangar bay of the Ulan flagship. Holmes stepped out, his heart pounding in his chest, as Ulan guards flanked him on either side, their weapons at the ready. The corridors of the ship were sterile and cold, the walls lined with the unfamiliar alien script that Holmes had spent countless hours deciphering. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into the belly of the beast, a lamb to the slaughter. The doors to the command deck slid open with a hiss, and Holmes found himself face to face with Pryor. The Ulan commander loomed over him, his dark eyes inscrutable as he studied the human before him. "Speak, human," Pryor commanded, his voice cold and detached. "Convince me." Holmes took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts as he began to speak. He spoke of the ingenuity of the human spirit, of the way adversity had always spurred humanity to greater heights. He described the leaps in technology, The advances in science and medicine, the unquenchable thirst for knowledge that had driven humanity forward. "We are not a race to be underestimated," Holmes said, his voice ringing with conviction. "We have so much to offer, not just in technology, but in perspective and innovation. Imagine what we could achieve together, as allies." Pryor listened in silence, his expression unreadable as he considered the human's words. When Holmes fell silent, the commander leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Bold words," he said at last. "But words are not enough. You speak of innovation. Prove it." The alien gestured to a holographic display where a complex tangle of equations and diagrams rotated slowly. "This is a problem that has confounded our best engineers for cycles," Pryor explained, his tone challenging. "Solve it, and perhaps I will believe in the value of your partnership." Holmes stepped forward, his mind already racing as he examined the display. The problem was daunting, a mess of advanced physics and theoretical mathematics that would have stumped even Earth's most brilliant minds. But Holmes was not alone. "I'll need my team," Holmes said, meeting Pryor's gaze with determination. "The brightest minds on Earth. Give us a chance and we'll find a solution." Pryor hesitated, the weight of the decision evident in his eyes. But the allure of the technology was too strong to resist. "You have one cycle," he said, his tone grudging. "Impress me." As Holmes and his team set to work, the pressure mounted. The clock was ticking, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. The Ulan were superior in every way, stronger, more advanced, more ruthless. But they did not know the depths of human courage and resolve, the determination that had driven them to survive against all odds. Holmes worked tirelessly, his mind racing as he and his team tackled the problem with every tool at their disposal. Equations were scribbled on holographic boards. Virtual models spun and reshaped as they chased down every lead, every possibility. Hours passed, like minutes, the tension in the room palpable as they edged closer to a solution. And then finally a breakthrough. "We've got it!" Holmes exclaimed, his voice filled with triumph as the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. The design was unlike anything the Ulan had ever seen, a daring, unconventional approach that rewrote the rules of what they had thought possible. Holmes presented the solution to Pryor, the holographic model glowing with the promise of innovation. The Ulan commander studied the design, his expression unreadable as he weighed the human's achievement. "Impressive," Pryor admitted grudgingly. "For a primitive species, it seems there may be more to you than meets the eye." Holmes met the commander's gaze, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Then you'll consider my proposal, a partnership, a chance for our races to learn from each other?" Pryor was silent for a long moment, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. The Ulan way was conquest, subjugation, the strong ruling over the weak. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was another path. "I will extend the deadline," Pryor said at last, his voice gruff. "We will have further negotiations, discuss the terms of this partnership. But mark my words, human, one false move, one hint of treachery, and my forces will rain fire upon your world." Holmes nodded, his expression solemn. "I understand, Commander. We seek only peace and cooperation." The transmission ended, and Holmes sagged back in his seat, the tension draining from his body. They had bought time, a chance for diplomacy, but he knew the road ahead would be fraught with peril. Even now, whispers of dissent were spreading through the Ulan ranks, hardline commanders eager for conquest and glory, chafing at the idea of treating with a lesser species. They saw the humans as weak, ripe for subjugation, and Pryor's willingness to negotiate as a betrayal of the Ulan way. In the shadowed corners of the flagship, a mutiny brewed, a challenge to Pryor's command and a threat to the fragile hope for peace. And on Earth, humanity's leaders prepared for the worst, knowing that any misstep, any hint of weakness could bring the Ulan's wrath crashing down upon them. For Holmes, the battle had only just begun. He would need every ounce of his skill, his wit, and his courage to navigate the treacherous path ahead, to forge an alliance out of mistrust and fear, to bring two races together in the face of annihilation. The stakes had never been higher, and the margin for error never thinner. But for the sake of his world, for the future of his species, Joseph Holmes would not back down. He would fight with every weapon at his disposal, words, wits, and the indomitable spirit of humanity, to secure a place for his people among the stars, regardless of the cost. Holmes and his team stepped onto the Ulan flagship, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hangar. The air thrummed with tension as Ulan guards flanked them, their weapons at the ready. Holmes couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the belly of the beast, surrounded by enemies who saw them as little more than insects. As they delved deeper into Ulan technology, working side by side with their alien counterparts, Holmes noticed subtle differences among the Ulan. Some, like Pryor, carried themselves with a rigid posture, their movements almost mechanical. Others moved with fluid grace, their eyes sharp and calculating, always watching, always judging. One night, as Holmes pored over Ulan schematics, a data file caught his eye. He opened it and his blood ran cold. The file detailed a complex hierarchy of races, with a small elite ruling over countless subjugated species. Pryor's name appeared in a list of high-ranking servants. Holmes sought out Pryor in his private quarters, his voice low and urgent. "Commander, we need to talk." Pryor's eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What is the meaning of this, human?" Holmes laid out his findings, watching Pryor's face carefully. The commander's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "You understand nothing," Pryor hissed, his voice filled with barely restrained anger. "This is the way it has always been." Holmes shook his head, his voice calm but insistent. "But it doesn't have to be," he pressed. "Together we could change things, create a more just society, one where all species are treated as equals." Pryor turned away, his shoulders slumping under the weight of centuries of tradition and oppression. "Even if I wanted to, it's impossible," he muttered, his voice tinged with defeat. "The elite's control is absolute." Holmes placed a hand on Pryor's shoulder, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Nothing is impossible," he said softly. "We've already proven that by working together." For a long moment, Pryor was silent, his mind racing as he weighed the human's words. Then, slowly, he turned back to Holmes, a fire kindling in his eyes. "What do you propose?" They worked in secret, developing communication devices to bypass Ulan surveillance. Holmes's team labored tirelessly, their fingers flying over holographic interfaces as they wrote complex encryption algorithms designed to keep their plans hidden from prying eyes. As the days passed, tension mounted within the Ulan fleet. Hardline commanders glared at the humans with open hostility, their voices raised in heated arguments, demanding an end to the negotiations and the immediate subjugation of Earth. Holmes overheard snippets of these conversations, his heart heavy with the knowledge that their fragile alliance was on the brink of collapse. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. Holmes and Pryor stood side by side on the bridge of the flagship, facing a sea of Ulan faces, their expressions a mix of suspicion and curiosity. With a nod to his team, Holmes activated the broadcast, his voice ringing out across the ship and beyond, to every vessel in the armada. "People of the Ulan fleet," he began, his voice steady and calm, "you've been lied to, enslaved, but today we offer you the truth and a chance at freedom." Evidence flooded the screens. Documents, videos, testimony from subjugated races, all revealing the true nature of the Ulan elite. The bridge erupted into chaos, shouts of anger and disbelief filling the air. Guards raised their weapons, unsure where to aim, their loyalty torn between the elite they had served for generations and the truth now laid bare before them. Pryor stepped forward, his voice cutting through the din like a blade. "I am one of you," he declared, his voice filled with conviction. "I have served the elite faithfully, but no more. Today we claim our freedom." The ship shuddered as explosions rocked distant sectors, alarms blaring on the tactical display. Holmes watched as rebel factions seized control of key systems across the fleet. "For Earth! For freedom!" Holmes shouted, diving for cover as energy weapons blazed to life. The battle raged through the corridors of the flagship, Holmes and Pryor fighting back-to-back, human and Ulan united against the elite's forces. Screams and weapons fire echoed through the ship as the uprising spread like wildfire. Hours passed in a blur of combat and chaos. When the dust finally settled, Holmes and Pryor stood victorious on the bridge, surrounded by cheering rebels. The Ulan elite were in chains, their reign of oppression at an end. In the days that followed, a new order took shape. Representatives from each subjugated race gathered to form a coalition government determined to build a future free from tyranny. Prior, respected by all for his role in the uprising, emerged as a key leader, his voice carrying weight in the new council. Holmes watched with pride as humans and Ulan worked together to forge a new future, but even as they celebrated their victory, he knew that greater challenges lay ahead. The galaxy was watching, and not all would welcome this new balance of power. As Holmes prepared to return to Earth, Prior approached him, his expression serious. "We've won a great victory," the Ulan said, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "But our work is nowhere near the end." Holmes nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Then we'll face what comes together as allies and friends." They clasped hands, human and Ulan, ready to guide their people into an uncertain but hopeful future. The celebration of their victory was short-lived. Holmes sat in the command center of the Ulan flagship, his eyes fixed on the holographic display in front of him. A sea of red dots swarmed towards their position, each representing a Zarthan warship. "They're coming," Prior said, his voice tight with tension as he studied the incoming fleet. The Zarthans saw the newly formed alliance as weak, easy prey for their conquest. Holmes nodded grimly, his mind racing as he formulated a plan. "We need allies, fast," he said, his voice filled with urgency. The next few days were a whirlwind of frantic diplomacy, as Holmes reached out to the United Nations via subspace link, his words echoing through the General Assembly Hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the stakes, "Earth is no longer alone in the universe. We have an opportunity to forge an alliance that could secure our place among the stars. But we must act now." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, the weight of the decision evident on the faces of the delegates. A stern-faced woman stood up, her voice filled with skepticism. "And what of the Ulan? Can we trust those who once sought to conquer us?" Holmes gestured to Prior, who stepped forward, his voice resolute. "We are not the oppressors we once were. We seek redemption and a chance to stand alongside humanity as equals." The debate raged for hours, but in the end, Earth agreed to join the alliance. A joint task force was assembled, a motley crew of humans and Ulan crammed into ships that had mere weeks ago been on opposite sides of a war. As they set out into the vastness of space, Holmes couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. Could this fragile alliance really stand against the might of the Zarthans? Their first stop was a desolate world on the fringes of former Ulan space. The Zeroi, once proud and mighty, now huddled in underground bunkers, their cities reduced to rubble by centuries of Ulan oppression. When Holmes and Prior stepped out of their ship, they were met with a hail of energy weapons fire. "Wait!" Holmes shouted, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We come in peace!" A Zeroi elder emerged, his crystalline skin glinting in the dim light. "Peace?" he spat, his voice filled with contempt. "From Ulans and their human lapdogs? I think not." Holmes stepped forward, his voice calm but urgent. "The Zarthans are coming. They'll do to you what the Ulans once did, but 100 times worse. We're here to offer you a chance to fight back." The elder's eyes narrowed, suspicion etched into every line of his face. "And why should we believe you?" Holmes looked to Prior, who dropped to his knees, his voice filled with sincerity. "I am here to beg your forgiveness for all that my people have done." The silence stretched out, tense and uncertain. Then slowly the elder nodded. "Very well, we will hear you out." But even as they secured the Zeroi's allegiance, disaster struck. A Zarthan vanguard fleet dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons blazing as they attacked the fledgling alliance. The ragtag fleet scrambled to respond, ships rising from the planet's surface in a desperate bid to meet the attackers head-on. Holmes found himself on the bridge of a Zeroi cruiser, barking orders as energy beams lanced through space. Prior commanded the Ulan contingent, his voice steady over the comms as he directed their forces. The battle raged for hours, a chaotic dance of light and destruction. Holmes watched in horror as ship after ship winked out of existence, lives snuffed out in an instant. Then a scream of pain cut through the comms. "Prior!" Holmes shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "What's happening?" "I'm hit," came the ragged reply, the sound of alarms blaring in the background. "Hull breach. losing atmosphere. Holmes's mind raced as he weighed his options. They were winning the battle, but at what cost? He could order a rescue mission for Pryor, but it would mean diverting crucial forces from the front line. With a heavy heart, Holmes made his choice. "Hold on, old friend," he said. His voice choked with emotion. "We'll get you out of there as soon as we can." The battle raged on, and when the last Zarthan ship finally turned tail and fled, Holmes felt no joy in their victory. He rushed to Pryor's ship, praying he wasn't too late. They found the Ulan commander barely clinging to life, his body battered and broken. As medics rushed him to the nearest stasis pod, Holmes gripped his friend's hand. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice filled with desperation. "We're not done yet." With Pryor's life hanging by a thread, Holmes pushed the fleet onward. They had won a battle, but the war was just getting started. Their next stop was the Aurelian Empire, a race of warriors whose support could tip the scales in their favor. As they approached Aurelian space, Holmes stood before the assembled leaders of their fragile alliance, his voice filled with determination. "What we do here will determine the fate of not just our worlds, but countless others. We cannot fail." The Aurelian homeworld loomed before them, a gleaming jewel in the darkness of space. As they prepared to make contact, Holmes could only hope that his words would be enough to sway these proud warriors to their cause. The fate of humanity and all the alien species they had allied with hung in the balance, and time was running out. The Alliance's war room buzzed with activity as Joseph Holmes pored over holographic star charts, zero-eye technicians working alongside human engineers, their crystalline fingers dancing across control panels. Ulan strategists debated tactics, their voices echoing off the metal walls. Holmes rubbed his eyes, fatigue etched on his face. "Pryor, what's the status of our forward scouts?" The Ulan commander strode to Holmes's side, his movements fluid despite his recent recovery. "They've detected the Zarthan fleet, Joseph. They're advancing faster than we anticipated." Holmes nodded, his eyes sharp with focus. "Then we move now. Initiate Operation Shadow Strike." Alarms blared throughout the Allied fleet as stealth shuttles, cloaked with Zeroid technology, prepared for their missions. Holmes boarded the lead shuttle, checking his gear one last time. Remember, he addressed his team, a mix of humans, Ulans, and Zeroi. "Our goal is to disrupt their supply lines. We get in, plant the charges, and get out. No heroics." The shuttle slipped silently through space, its cloaking field rendering it invisible to Zarthan sensors. They approached a massive Zarthan shipyard, its skeletal structures stretching for kilometers. "Docking in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. Holmes felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as the shuttle latched onto the shipyard's outer hull. They cut through the metal, creating an entry point, and the team moved swiftly through dimly lit corridors, planting explosive charges at key structural points. Holmes checked his wrist computer, tracking their progress. 60% complete, he whispered. "Let's pick up the pace." Suddenly, alarms blared, and a squad of Zarthan warriors rounded the corner, their chitinous armor gleaming in the emergency lights. "Take cover!" Holmes shouted, diving behind a metal crate as energy bolts sizzled past. The air filled with weapons fire and the acrid smell of ozone. Holmes's team fought back, their diverse weaponry catching the Zarthans off guard, but more enemy soldiers poured in, their numbers overwhelming. "Fall back to the extraction point," Holmes ordered, providing covering fire as his team retreated. He felt a searing pain in his leg as an energy bolt grazed him, stumbling as he saw his team reach the shuttle. Relief washed over him, quickly replaced by dread as a stun grenade rolled to his feet. "Go!